When Ozzy Osbourne breathed his last on July 22nd, the world had barely begun to process the loss before a stunning revelation surfaced from his final will and testament. His immense estate, valued at over $200 million, including music royalties, properties in both the UK and US, shares in the Ozzy brand, and numerous post-career image rights was left entirely to one individual. Though the name was familiar, its appearance in the will sparked immediate and intense conflict within the family. The real shock came when it was disclosed that none of Ozzy's 3 children from his first marriage would receive any portion of the inheritance. The decision led the trio to swiftly consult lawyers and begin preparing for legal proceedings. Speculation exploded. Had Ozzy, whose health had declined to the point where he could no longer care for himself, been mentally fit to sign such a will? Or had someone close to him, perhaps a caretaker, taken advantage of his fragile state to influence the outcome? This video uncovers the true contents of Ozzy's final will, and the story of how his legacy was divided. The morning of July 22, 2025, began with a somber announcement from Ozzy's legal team. An unsettling stillness lingered over the Osbourne residence in Buckinghamshire. Sharon Osbourne, his wife of over 4 decades, was the first to enter his room. After receiving no response throughout the night, she found Ozzy lying motionless, his skin pale, his expression hauntingly calm. A long moment of silence passed before Sharon screamed and called for medical help. Paramedics arrived swiftly, but all efforts to resuscitate him failed. The iconic rock figure had died quietly in his sleep, without a final goodbye, leaving his loved ones without closure. Only hours later, a brief but emotionally powerful statement was issued by the family. Ozzy Osbourne had passed away peacefully, surrounded by those closest to him. The announcement was made by Sharon herself, his devoted partner, manager, and now, the custodian of everything he had built. The world was stunned. News outlets scrambled to report the loss. Fans were heartbroken, and those close to him began to ask difficult questions. But the real storm erupted when the contents of his will were revealed, triggering instant uproar within the Osbourne family. As grief swept across the globe, a deeper conflict began brewing behind closed doors. Ozzy Osbourne, the rock legend, the symbol of rebellion, the master of dark anthems, left behind not just mourners, but a colossal estate. A $220 million empire now stood in limbo, awaiting distribution. And at the very center of this financial battleground stood Sharon Osbourne, the fierce wife, longtime manager, and co-architect of Ozzy's legacy. His will gave her full control over the entirety of his fortune for the rest of her life. From music royalties and multi-million-dollar real estate holdings to lucrative stakes in ventures like Ozzy, Sharon was handed total dominion. She wasn't just an inheritor, she became the ruler of the empire. However, even the strongest empires face eventual transition. After Sharon's time, the inheritance would pass on to the 3 children she and Ozzy had together, Amy, Kelly, and Jack. Once household names from reality TV, these siblings now stood at the gates of a legacy worth hundreds of millions. But whether this legacy would be shared equally or masked deeper tensions remained a looming question. Amy Osbourne, the eldest daughter, who had long distanced herself from public life and refused to take part in the family's reality show, received a carefully structured inheritance. A personal trust fund was set up for her, but with conditions. She could only access it in stages, and not fully until she turned 50. The choice seemed gentle, yet quietly painful. While it signaled love, it also hinted at questions about whether an unresolved rift still lingered between father and daughter. In stark contrast, Kelly Osbourne, the outspoken, sharp, and strategic middle child, was named co-executor of the will alongside Sharon. This gave her significant authority over the estate, including the power to approve or block future financial distributions. Mrs. Kelly's role was not just that of an heir, but a financial gatekeeper, a position that could either stabilize or ignite further family conflict. Meanwhile, Jack Osbourne, the only son, inherited valuable California real estate and was given oversight of Ozzy's music royalties, a treasure chest that continues to earn endlessly. Once the innocent face on a reality show, Jack had now become the steward of his father's musical empire. But with great assets come greater responsibilities and the pressure of navigating financial disputes within his own family. The drama only deepened when Ozzy's 3 children from his first marriage, Elliot, Jessica, and Louis, were also mentioned in the will. Though rarely seen in the public eye, they weren't forgotten. Collectively, they were allocated $5 million, locked in a UK trust that no one else could touch. Yet, they were intentionally left out of all decisions related to the Ozzy Osbourne brand. The omission stung, a final distancing from a father who had been largely absent during their childhoods. Ozzy's legacy was not just about wealth or material assets. His empire encompassed symbolic influence, brand recognition, and a library of music that would generate royalties long after his death. Whoever held the rights would hold the key to generational wealth. But in the high-stakes world of legacy and inheritance, it's not always the strongest who win. Sometimes the ones who appear powerless hold the greatest leverage in the end. When Ozzy Osbourne's will was finally revealed, it raised eyebrows across the world. Almost immediately, whispers turned into a wave of conspiracy theories. People began asking what really happened in the final years of this legendary rock icon. For the last 3 years of his life, Ozzy fought a painful and relentless medical battle. His health reports read like a medical horror story: motor neuron degeneration, chronic myelitis, spinal cord injuries, and the cruel grip of Parkinson's disease. To fight back, Ozzy went through stem cell treatments, immune therapies, and intense rehabilitation sessions. Throughout those turbulent years, one person remained firmly by his side: Sharon Osbourne. She was more than a wife. She became his shield, his planner, and the driving force behind every detail of his life. As Parkinson's took a toll, making his body tremble, his voice weaken, and his mind slow, Sharon never left him. Whether he was in hospitals, therapy rooms, recording studios, or at home, she was always there, overseeing everything like a commander managing a kingdom under siege. But Parkinson's wasn't his only battle. Ozzy also carried trauma from his 2003 ATV crash, underwent multiple spinal surgeries, and lived with metal rods embedded in his body. Amid this chaos, Sharon took control of everything. She managed his medical care, scheduled therapies, watched his diet, and even decided what Ozzy could say in public. Still, there were moments when he resisted. On one occasion, he lashed out at the nurses in pain till Sharon entered the room. She didn't speak, she just looked at him, and he immediately went silent. Her influence wasn't loud or aggressive, it was a quiet authority shaped by decades of surviving fame, addiction, scandals, and even Ozzy himself. Without her, many believe he wouldn't have made it this far. In 2023, Ozzy said in an interview, "I'm a sinking ship and she's the only one who can swim." When depression consumed him after losing the ability to walk, Sharon had a recording studio built inside their home, giving him a reason to keep making music, to feel like he still had purpose. When asked by the media about Ozzy's condition, Sharon never gave in to sympathy. "He doesn't need pity. He needs to be remembered as a warrior," she said. Sources confirmed she rejected dozens of TV and business offers just to stay by his side. She even cut ties with certain relatives to maintain a quiet, controlled environment at home, turning it into a sanctuary where Ozzy could face his illness in peace. Every interview, phone call, and meeting had to go through her. No one could approach Ozzy without her approval. Staff even claimed she had installed 24/7 security cameras to monitor his condition. One night, when Ozzy tried sneaking out of bed to find a hidden whiskey bottle, she appeared within 90 seconds. She didn't scold him, she poured the drink down the sink. The look she gave him, not angry but deeply disappointed, made him break down in tears. Sharon didn't just care for Ozzy's body, she held on to his soul. When he couldn't recognize familiar faces or lost his memory, she would sit beside him, softly retelling the milestones of his life. "You're the Prince of Darkness," she'd whisper. "Even if the world forgets, I never will. I remember the fire in your eyes on that first stage." Ozzy's final days weren't filled with screaming fans or late-night parties. They were filled with cold mornings when he couldn't even hold a spoon. The pain often made him groan like a wounded animal. But one thing remained constant: Sharon was there. When doctors told her that Ozzy had only a few months left, she simply replied, "Then we still have plenty of work to do." Ozzy Osbourne passed away on the morning of July 22, 2025, at his private estate in Buckinghamshire. When the Prince of Darkness took his final breath, the music world came to a halt. His hometown of Birmingham was covered in flowers, candles, and banners that read "Ozzy Forever." But true to his rebellious nature, Ozzy had left behind one last unexpected request. Instead of a traditional funeral, he wanted a final music celebration, one more party where people would dance, sing, and laugh to his favorite tracks, whether from Black Sabbath or even Justin Bieber. "I don't need a vigil. I need one more stage," he had said during his last interview. That statement shocked fans around the world, adding another layer to his unforgettable legacy. Sources revealed that a private funeral had been carefully organized at a centuries-old church near London. There was also talk of a public tribute in Birmingham, possibly featuring music legends like Metallica, Elton John, and Robert Plant, but nothing has been confirmed. The mansion is closed to the press, and those close to Sharon remain silent. Still, one moment now stands out: the concert at Villa Park, Birmingham, just weeks before his passing. That event, now seen as his real farewell, featured Ozzy sitting on an iron throne. His voice wasn't as powerful as before, but it carried the same emotional weight. Every note felt like a personal goodbye. As tens of thousands cheered, no one knew they were witnessing a final tribute to Ozzy's last stand on the battlefield of music. But the storm wasn't over. Even before the ink on his will had dried, controversy ignited. The most suspicious detail: Sharon Osbourne inherited everything. She now controls a fortune of over $220 million. She received all of Ozzy's properties, music rights, and brand ownership, and she alone has the authority to decide what happens to it in the future. According to the will, not even Ozzy's biological children have any control unless Sharon herself is no longer alive. There was an unprecedented concentration of power, and that very detail raised a burning question. Why did Ozzy choose to divide things this way, right before his death? According to sources close to the family, the new will was signed less than 3 months before Ozzy passed away. Previous versions of the will, which had divided the estate more equally between Sharon and his children, were voided. This major change occurred at a time when Ozzy's health was rapidly declining, his memory was fading, and he had become entirely dependent on Sharon for his daily needs. Was he truly in a sound mental state when he signed it? Or was he being influenced by someone who had long mastered behind-the-scenes manipulation? Although no solid evidence has surfaced so far, the fact that Sharon received complete control in the new will while Ozzy's 3 children from a previous marriage were left with only undisclosed portions has sparked serious suspicion. The children were excluded from any role in the management of brand royalties or future income assets. This raises an unsettling question. Could the bond of blood really be worth less than a legal marriage? Even more concerning, all powers following Sharon's eventual death, from the control of branding and copyrights to the handling of liquid assets, were assigned solely to the couple's 3 children, Amy, Kelly, and Jack. The will didn't include a single mention of any provisions for Ozzy's other children, nor did it set aside a trust for any grandchildren, which is a common inclusion in most standard wills. Could a deliberate effort to cut off a bloodline be hidden beneath what appears to be a clean and organized estate plan? Adding to the growing doubts is another unsettling detail. The witness who signed the will was Sharon's longtime personal attorney, not an independent legal figure, as is typically expected in such matters. Legal experts have raised questions about the objectivity and fairness of the drafting and signing process. Was someone quietly orchestrating the complete transfer of a rock legend's wealth during his most vulnerable moment? Did Ozzy even fully understand what he was signing at the time? To make matters worse, an anonymous insider from the Osbourne circle revealed that Ozzy had expressed interest in amending his will after a heartfelt phone conversation with his estranged daughter Jessica the year before. He had hoped to reconcile, but the final version of the will shows no sign of that change. So what happened? Why did those apparent final wishes disappear without a trace? As speculation continues to grow, people are beginning to wonder, was Ozzy, in his last days, no longer the fearless prince of darkness, but a frail man in a hospital bed, simply signing whatever was placed in front of him? If these suspicions are true, a major legal battle could be on the horizon. A case titled Osbourne vs. Osbourne might soon explode and send shockwaves through the entertainment world. For now, Sharon remains quiet. Kelly and Jack avoid all media questions. While Ozzy's children from his first marriage are reportedly meeting behind closed doors with lawyers in London, they want to see the full contents of the will. They want to know exactly when their father changed his mind. And above all, they want to know who truly controlled the final legacy of the man who once made the world shake with the force of heavy metal. Yet, with the release of Ozzy's final will, several theories have begun to circulate. The first one is the most sympathetic. According to this view, Ozzy passed away naturally after years of intense suffering, struggling with Parkinson's, enduring debilitating spinal injuries, and losing both his physical and mental strength. In his final years, he lived in near isolation. He had stopped performing, rarely appeared in public, and relied completely on Sharon, his wife, his manager, and his lifelong support system. Sharon wasn't just his spouse. She was the mastermind behind Ozzy's entire solo career after Black Sabbath. She made every major decision: world tours, marketing strategies, branding partnerships. More importantly, she was the one who helped pull Ozzy out of his darkest moments of addiction and despair. When they married in 1982, Ozzy was on the verge of collapse. But Sharon, with her fierce determination and intelligence, rebuilt him into an international solo icon. Despite the storms in their marriage, Sharon remained by his side. People still remember the painful public scandal in 2016 when Ozzy's affair with a young hairdresser became public. Sharon walked out and declared the marriage over, but months later, she came back. She forgave him and resumed her life not just as a wife, but as the caregiver of a man who was becoming increasingly dependent, both emotionally and physically. In his 2007 autobiography, Ozzy admitted to having been violent toward Sharon. He even confessed that, in a drunken rage, he nearly killed her, an incident that forced him into mandatory rehab. Those wounds were deep and likely never healed fully, yet she stayed. Supporters of this theory believe that the will was not part of some sinister plot, but rather a gesture of remorse, Ozzy's final way of saying sorry. It was a quiet offering of redemption, by leaving everything: his music, rights, property, and personal brand to Sharon. He wasn't just giving her money, he was granting her power, legacy, and acknowledgement. He gave everything to the woman who had stood by him for over 40 years, who had rebuilt his life and career, more than once. To many, it feels like a poetic conclusion to a chaotic love story, flawed, damaged, but undeniably loyal. And in a world as turbulent and scandalous as rock and roll, Ozzy and Sharon's love endured till the very end. Viewed through this lens, the will becomes a symbol of fierce, battle-scarred love. If that's the truth, then perhaps no one has the right to question the final decision of a man who lived loudly, loved deeply, and regretted honestly. But the second theory takes a much darker turn. It suggests manipulation. It suggests that Sharon, exhausted and fully in control of Ozzy's life, may have taken advantage of him or worse, may have orchestrated his peaceful passing, not through violence, but through quiet means. A few pills, a medical file, and a signature in a law office she knew well. What makes this more alarming is the disappearance of the old will one that supposedly divided assets fairly between wife and children. It vanished, only to be replaced by a new version where Sharon ended up with everything clearly accounted for. Meanwhile, the three children were left with vague, undisclosed portions of the estate. What does that mean? A hidden trust fund? A tiny stake in the family company? Or just something for the press to point to as inclusion? Outrage intensified when an old TV clip resurfaced. In it, Sharon bluntly stated, "Taking care of Ozzy isn't a wifely duty. It's a burden I bear as his manager." That quote now haunts the narrative, feeding into the suspicion that what was once love may have transformed into control and ultimately into complete takeover. At first, it was dismissed as just another sarcastic remark, but looking back now, it sounds more like a haunting warning and expression of deep fatigue, a feeling stuck in a marriage with no way out. In his final months, close insiders say Ozzy was often disoriented. He struggled to recognize familiar faces, spoke in confused sentences, and at times even forgot the names of his own children. In such a state, could he have been mentally present enough to sign what would become the most critical legal document of his life? Or was his shaking hand simply led by a colder, more determined force? Online, opinions are deeply divided. Supporters of Sharon argue that no one is more deserving of protecting Ozzy's image, legacy, and brand. After all, she gave up her life for him, and now they say it's only fair she receives something in return. But others aren't so sure. They're calling for an investigation, suspecting the will was signed under duress. Some are even questioning whether Ozzy's passing was truly natural or the final act of a carefully planned ending. Sharon has maintained complete silence. No media statements, no public appearances since the funeral. But this silence is only fueling the speculation. Across media outlets in the UK, US, and Australia, the same unsettling question is being whispered. Behind that tearful smile and mourning veil, was there a script? A deliberate handoff of power masked as love? For now, the answers remain buried in the shadows, the very place Ozzy once thrived. His passing, and the controversy surrounding the will, have shaken his global fan base to its core. It may be years before the truth comes out, if it ever does. But one thing's for sure, Ozzy didn't just leave behind music, he left behind a mystery that the world can't stop staring at. Perhaps that's his final and most dangerous legacy, a rock icon who refused to fade away quietly. At the heart of his towering career was Black Sabbath, the band that helped shape an entirely new genre of music. When Ozzy Osbourne was forced out of Black Sabbath in 1999, the same band he had co-founded, many believed his journey was over. Drowning in substance abuse, lost in chaos, he seemed consumed by the darkness he had long embraced in his music. But just when it appeared to be the end, the so-called Prince of Darkness staged an epic return, fierce, defiant, and unstoppable. What followed was one of the most legendary solo careers in rock history. Barely a year after his departure from Sabbath, Ozzy dropped Blizzard of Oz in 1980, a thunderous debut that stunned critics and stormed the charts. The anthem Crazy Train blared like a declaration of war, signaling a new era. Now unshackled from Sabbath, Ozzy ruled his own heavy metal empire. With guitar virtuoso Randy Rhoads at his side, he rewrote the genre's rulebook, transforming personal pain into eternal sound. Then came Diary of a Madman in 1981, a dark, eerie masterpiece. But just as his solo career took off, tragedy struck. Randy Rhoads was killed in a plane crash. The world assumed Ozzy would break under the weight of it, but he didn't. He returned, wounded but unbroken, with Bark at the Moon, an album that screamed through grief and madness. Turning heartbreak into explosive power, Ozzy didn't fade, he transcended. Album after album followed The Ultimate Sin, No Rest for the Wicked, and No More Tears, which featured the emotional anthem Mama, I'm Coming Home. These records proved he never needed Sabbath to define him. He was the very heartbeat of heavy metal. Even as grunge and alternative music took over in the 1990s, Ozzy held his ground, pouring his soul into every note, screaming against the noise of a rapidly changing world. But Ozzy wasn't just a music icon, he was a phenomenon. A turning point came in 2002 when he and his family opened their doors to the world in the reality TV series The Osbournes. Viewers saw a different side of the legend, messy, unpredictable, yet deeply human. The show became a sensation. Ozzy, once known for his wild stage antics, had now become a household name. Chaotic, yes, but beloved. He had conquered more than just music. He had conquered pop culture. With his bathrobe, mumbled speech, and raw honesty, he reshaped what it meant to be a celebrity in the 21st century. And he kept going. He launched Ozfest, a revolutionary metal festival that became the heartbeat of the genre in the 2000s, hosting acts like Slipknot, Korn, and System of a Down. While others from his generation faded into silence, Ozzy remained on fire. Eyes blazing, voice roaring, never losing that ferocious energy he had in his 30s. Even as illness crept in and injuries slowed him down, he didn't back down. In 2020, he returned with Ordinary Man, a somber, soul-searching album soaked in reflection. It wasn't a farewell, it was a living testament, filled with heart-wrenching riffs and raw emotion. Under the Graveyard shook listeners too. The core. At nearly 72, Ozzy still had the power to bring the world to its knees, but he had one more masterpiece to give. In 2022, he released Patient No. 9, his final studio album, featuring legends like Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Zakk Wylde, and Tony Iommi. The album was a triumphant success, earning him a Grammy and sealing his status as one of the last great titans of rock. Ozzy had once again returned louder, darker, and more powerful than ever. Then, on July 5, 2025, at the Back to the Beginning concert in Birmingham, he made his final appearance. Perched on an iron throne, his voice frail but determined, he delivered a performance that felt like a sacred rite. The crowd at Villa Park didn't just cheer, they wept, sang, and roared with him. That night wasn't just a concert. It was a canonization from the streets of Birmingham to the heights of rock immortality. Ozzy's journey came full circle, ending in the same storm of metal with which it began. By the time the world officially recognized him as a pop culture legend, he had already sold over 100 million records globally. Even as his health declined and he stepped away from live performances, independent data showed that his catalog continued to sell steadily each year. His unmistakable voice became a subject of study across fields like musicology, linguistics, and expressive arts education in top institutions. Though he's no longer with us, his most enduring legacy remains the music. Over 5 decades, from Black Sabbath's thunderous riffs to the emotional chaos of his solo work, Ozzy defined what heavy metal meant to millions. Tracks like Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, No More Tears, and Mama, I'm Coming Home weren't just songs, they became generational anthems. They were raw cries from the abyss, speaking directly to those wandering in the dark. Ozzy's influence went far beyond his voice. He became a symbol, a man banned from the airwaves, who once bit the head off a bat on stage, who jokingly claimed Satan as a friend, yet the same man who broke down in tears for his children, his wife, and his regrets. It was that contrast, wild yet vulnerable, that made him a genuine artist, fragile, rebellious, and defiantly unbroken. But Ozzy's legacy extended beyond music. He embodied the spirit of resistance against judgment, against destruction, and against surrender. He was a man who narrowly escaped prison, who attempted to end his own life, who was fired from the band he built from scratch, yet he rose each time, fiercer than before. For every misfit and outsider who ever felt isolated or labeled weird, Ozzy's lyrics were a lifeline. They found understanding in his madness, and light in the shadows he embraced. Ozzy didn't sing about triumph, he sang about struggle, and from that struggle, he created unforgettable art. Perhaps his most powerful legacy is defiance itself. Born into working-class hardship, with little formal education and a life riddled with violence, addiction, and rejection, he transformed that wreckage into a rock and roll masterpiece. As he once put it, I'm no hero, I'm just a survivor, and I sing so that other survivors don't feel alone. Though Ozzy is gone, his voice still echoes through radios, in solitary bedrooms, across the stages of up-and-coming bands, and within every rebellious heartbeat he ever touched. He didn't just leave behind fame and fortune, he left behind a timeless treasure of spirit and sound. His music burns on as a fire in the hearts of rebels, a voice from the void that lifted millions. Yet even as fans mourn, questions linger around his final days. Sharon, his wife, inherited all music rights, real estate, and the Ozzy brand. The will was signed only weeks before his death, at a time when Ozzy was physically weak and entirely dependent on her. Was it all a tragic coincidence? Or is there more to the story than we've been told? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if Crazy Train still brings a tear to your eye, hold tight to that flame. Thanks for being part of Ozzy Osbourne's final chapter. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, as we continue uncovering the truth behind legends, truths that may be even wilder than the music itself.